Everybody else is connected, okay? I don't know. Okay, y'all should be around.
I got it. I know, where did I put mine? Better pass it. I was 6 yesterday. It's better now.
Good morning, Commissioner McAdams. How did the meeting go? Well, yes. Good. That's good. Yes.
Yeah. I was trying to do it home.
See why we're in Parsons.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. It is 9 o'clock, so we will call the meeting to order. I believe everyone is here, although not exactly in their seats right this minute. So wait just a second, I guess, for Commissioner McAdams to get back. So hold for a moment because I will need to do the conflict of interest question when he returns. In the meantime, if any commissioners are having trouble connecting to the internet, let us know. Let Lois know. So the first item on the agenda is the reminder that under North Carolina General Statute 138A:15, I need to remind all members of their duty to avoid conflicts of interest and inquire whether any commissioner has a known conflict of interest with respect to any of the matters coming before the commission today. Does anyone have a known conflict of interest? There is no indication of a conflict. And so we'll move to the second item on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes from the July 14th meeting. Are there any corrections or comments on the minutes? And if not, we can entertain a motion to approve them. Any corrections? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes as submitted?
Madam Chair, I move approval of the July 14th minute.
Commissioner Davis moves approval of the minutes. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Harris. All in favor, please raise your hands. All opposed? No opposition. All commission members who were present in July voted to approve the minutes. The first action item on the agenda is the request for approval of proposed rule revisions and regulatory impact analysis and to proceed to public hearing on amendments to the sulfur dioxide emissions rule. So I'll recognize from Division of Air Quality, Mr. Nelson.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Brad Nelson. I'm with the rulemaking branch of the Division of Air Quality. Here to seek approval guess to proceed the public hearing on the revisions to 15A NCAC 02B 0516. Just to give you a little background, this rule was adopted to help attain and maintain the national ambient air quality standard for SO2 in the state of North Carolina. Originally proposed in 1971, and the current rule and the current standard 2.3 pounds per million BTU was adopted in 1977. As many of you are aware, I guess there was a petition for declaratory ruling last year about the use of supplemental or excess fuel to meet the standard, and the commission determined or concluded that the plain language of the rule as it was written did not prohibit the use of excess fuel to meet the standard. And therefore, we were asked to, I guess, revise the rule to address that issue. The DAQ's position is that the use of excess fuel beyond what is needed for combustion is not a mean for compliance with the SO2 standard in the O2D 01516. A work group was put together with some planning, permitting, compliance, and regional offices to discuss the rule and to come up with some proposed language to address the issue. And what we did, I guess, we revised paragraph A, and we created a new paragraph B that includes some of the sections from paragraph A and subparts, and then added a third new subpart that shows that the not to include the heat input for coming up for calculating the standard or the compliance did not include fuels whose sole purpose is to increase the heat. And then we re-lettered the paragraph B to now C. A regulatory impact analysis was done on the rule. The costs were calculated for removing hydrogen sulfide from the waste gas that was being sent to the flare. Using an absorption process, we estimated the cost to be between about $60,000 per year and then $58,000 thereafter. Health benefits for this rule were calculated using COBRA, the EPA COBRA model, and they range from $49,000 to $112,020. We did not calculate the damages from reduced CO2 emissions. We had approval to proceed to the EMC in September at the AQC meeting. And now we are, I guess, requesting to proceed to comment period and hearing for the EMC. And this is the director is recommending the following. Does anybody have any questions?
Are there any questions for Mr. Nelson? Commissioner Carter?
Can you back up a slide or two to one more? Okay, right there. That'd be fine. Whoops. I think that's what I did. Yeah. You said that health benefits were estimated based on that model. What would be the health benefits here?
These would be the reduced emissions of SO2 as a result of putting on the control and the reduced use of natural gas that they're currently using to meet the standard. So reduce the PM 2.5, NOx, CO.
But you're getting significant PM 2.5 from natural gas.
There are some reductions, yes.
Um, I'm sorry. You mentioned H2S, reducing H2S excuse me, let me stay near the microphone. That was the situation in the petition we had, or the request for declaratory ruling last fall. But is that the only type of situation you would expect this to apply to in terms of folks using supplemental fuel to meet the SO2 standard?
It's the only one I'm aware of. There's another similar facility that's been permitted to use an absorption process, I guess, to capture H2S before combustion and the flare.
Well, okay, and that was going to be my next question. Yeah, what sort of controls are we talking about here in lieu of using supplemental fuel?
It would be a vessel with it contains an absorbent that captures the H2S in the vessel using an absorption process.
And that's the control. Let's see. You got that on here? No, that's impact. Oh, those are.
It's an iron sponge. It's media is wood chips that has a kind of an iron. There's an iron
compound on it.
Compound in there that reacts with sulfur and it removes the sulfur from the gas.
So it's the 60,000 and 58,000 up in bullet 2. Are those control cost numbers?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, I assume that would be just from one facility. That's not from a whole range of facilities, correct?
Right. This rule, I guess, is affecting just one facility currently. The other facility that has is doing a similar process is already permitted, and I guess or have installed or they're permitted to use an iron sponge absorption technology, so they would not be included, I guess, in this rule.
So the intent is to assuming this rule is adopted as written, to go back and also apply it to the facility that we issued the declaratory ruling for last fall.
Right.
Okay, that's all I have.
Any other questions for Mr. Nelson, Commissioner Kelvington?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. So I just had a couple questions. If you're looked at other permits to make sure this is not going to apply, if you set it retroactively to other facilities, have you reviewed to make sure this is, or to see if it would?
We've met with, I guess, the permitting office and discussed the change with them and asked them if there were similar facilities that might have issues with this, and they didn't indicate that there were any facilities that would be affected by this change.
Okay. And then the health benefits, is that a one-time health benefits, or is that an annual?
This would be an annual benefit,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, good. And then the other thing, have we, as a commission, gone back and have we established any type of air quality rule that was retroactive to the existing facilities? Has there been any precedence for that?
None that I'm aware of, perhaps the director.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if we have put something in place for an existing facility that now, they've already established, they're operating, that would require them to go back and to specifically address that one facility, target that one facility.
Mr. Abrazinskis?
Yes, thank you. I'd have to give that a little thought, Commissioner Kelvington, but I would say that anytime that there's a need to update a rule or change a standard for a variety of reasons, it can apply to a whole suite of existing facilities, and they would be have an obligation to comply with those new standards once they are adopted, or on a compliance schedule if it's set forth in the regulation.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the division staff?
I just one more.
Commissioner
Thank you. Thank you. I was wanting to see if there was going to be a compliance schedule for this facility. Would they, like, once this rule went into place, would they have to immediately comply with that, or would they be put on a schedule to meet those requirements?
There would be some permit changes that need to be made. And then during that process, I guess the permitting group will allow the facility have time to install the control technology and come into compliance with the rule.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Nelson? Commissioner McAdams?
Madam Chair, if I may, and with apologies both for my lateness and resulting from that, my struggling to catalog everything that you have said. So this may be repetitious.
Okay.
But what triggered this was an incident in which an entity was using natural gas just to increase the BTU input to achieve dilution to get down under a standard.
Right.
Okay, so now there is sulfur dioxide in the tail gas that needs to be reduced by other means, not by that means.
It's the hydrogen sulfide that's the issue. It converts to SO2 in the flame.
Okay, yes, that. The costs you have estimated up here, the total impact for the benefits are in the range of 60 to 50 for the first year, 58,000 thereafter. Just a small point. Did that computation take into account the reduction in cost that they were bearing feeding the natural gas into their process? Because that's a counter cost. That's something that reduces the financial impact. Instead of feeding the natural gas, they'll have to use this other process.
Right. We considered we did not include the natural gas cost savings, but we did include the less natural gas that was used in the emissions, I guess, calculating the emission reductions that would be associated. So yes, you're right. There would be, there may be a lower cost because you're using less natural gas.
Okay. All right. Well, I was wondering about that, and thank you. So it might well be less than 60,000 in the first year and 58,000 in the ensuing years.
It may, yes.
Because they will not be purchasing the natural gas that they used to be purchasing to do this.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, we got to be careful either way, because this cost of different gas is going to make the maintenance and O&M on that equipment maybe a lot shorter if we use dirtier gas. So it can go either way here, so.
Just to clarify, it looks like in the regulatory impact analysis in one of the final tables that it shows excess natural gas savings. So I'm not sure if that was reflected in the totals we're seeing on the PowerPoint slide, but it does appear to show 6,000, just over $6,000 in that excess natural gas savings.
Okay. I apologize. It's been a while since I did this analysis. So.
Okay. I thank you both for the clarification.
Yes. Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, is there a motion? The request by the division is to approve the rule revisions and the regulatory impact analysis to go to public hearing. Commissioner Arata?
I so move.
Commissioner Arata moves to send the rule revisions and the regulatory impact analysis to public hearing. Is there a second?
I second.
Commissioner McAdams seconds. Any further discussion on the motion? Mr. Carter?
Yeah, I am troubled, I'll say it this way, that we're doing a rulemaking to go after one specific facility after we granted their declaratory ruling request last November. This just doesn't sit well with me that we're tackling or going after a single facility that the division didn't like the way the ruling came out, and that's essentially what we're doing here. They haven't identified anybody else that this is going to apply to. It's simply oh, we didn't like that, so now we're going to go back and hit them with a new rule and require them to comply with the new rule. So I'm opposed to this motion. We'll vote against it.
Mr. McAdams?
Fellow commissioners, I see it a bit differently. At the time we granted, was it a declaratory judgment issue? We voiced that what we didn't like is we didn't like the rule that permitted this. And now we're changing that rule. It is also the case that others then could be permitted to do what that applicant was doing, that it has been demonstrated that the regulation doesn't prohibit providing supplemental natural gas to provide greater BTUs and dilute the emissions of hydrogen sulfide down to the permitted levels. So I see this accomplishing a good purpose here, rectifying the rule to what we feel sure it was meant to be, but wasn't worded properly for. Maybe there's only one user out there that took the other route, but we're closing that loophole by doing this. That's how I see it.
Is there any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hands. Any opposed? See 3 opposed. The motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you.
The next agenda item is request for approval for proposed rule revisions to correct errors in the rule readoption process. And this again is related to some Division of Air Quality rules. So Ms. Pickett.
It should be super fast. Well, that's true. I mean, I'm happy either way. Once we pop it up, it'll be good. So the readoption cleanup package is a process that's following our readoption process. So some of the members that have been around a while, oh, sorry. Yeah. Super appreciate it, thanks. So the rule readoption process took a period of several years, and these were very large packets of rules. There were several hundred rules. And during that time, little errors popped up that needed correcting. And so this particular project is just to clean up those errors. And this Part A package specifically are errors that are not required to go to public hearing, not required to go through the RRC or the Rules Review Commission process. So when you pass these 10 rules today, they will then come into effect October 1st once we notify OAH of them. We've also worked with OAH ahead of time on this, so they've already had a chance to look at these rules just so we could prevent any possible, oopsies. So just in case anyone's a little worried about that, we did kind of do a pre-review with these 10 rules. So these are the type of errors, all typographical in nature. I think 943 kind of stood out because it had this extraneous 1 in there that had to do with a software issue. When you changed from like DOS to Word, the different versions of Word, there was a random 1 added to something that changed from 20 degrees Celsius, which is typical ambient temperatures around 60 something degrees Fahrenheit, to 201 degrees Celsius in the 400 range, way too hot. Obviously not ambient temperatures in North Carolina. So these are the summary of the rules. This is our timeline. Like I said, will be tentatively effective in October. And this is our recommendation for the commission.
So the recommendation is to send the proposed rule amendments to OAH.
Yeah, so once EMC approves the rules today, as they are written, the department then sends them directly to OAH.
So these are technical corrections.
That is correct, and that's under the 150B 21.5 exceptions.
So are there any questions concerning the division's request for Ms. Pickett? Yes, Commissioner King.
Let's go to the bar city.
No, this will not go to the RRC. This actually bypasses that process because these errors are grammar in nature. I mean, some of them are punctuations, like changing a semicolon to a period, an is to an R. That's the nature of these corrections.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Pickett? If not, is there a motion to send these technical corrections to the Office of Administrative Hearings? Commissioner King moves approval to send the rules. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Um,
Commissioner Bailey.
Commissioner Bailey seconds the motion. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hands. Any opposed? Like sign? No votes in opposition. Thank you very much. The next action item is a request for approval of the 2022 annual report on developing and implementing Basinwad water resource management plans. Ms. Raquet.
Good morning, Commissioners. I am Michelle Raquet. I'm with the Division of Water Resources in the Basin Planning Branch. And I'm actually here today to present our biennial report for our Basin-wide Planning Branch. It was a typographical error in the agenda title today. Many of these slides you have seen before because we were here last September with our annual report. We had changes to the statute that now allows us to submit this report to the ERC, Environmental Review Commission, on the November 1st of every even-numbered year. So you'll be seeing us every even-numbered year to give you an update on the progress in developing and implementing our basin-wide water resources management plans. So in today's presentation, I'm going to just give you a quick review of the statute and the changes that were made to the statute. We'll review the progress on developing and implementing the basin plans. I'll give you a quick update on hydrologic models, and then we'll have a few concluding slides. Session Law 2021-158 changed the basin-wide planning statute. Those changes included a title change, changing the title from Basin-wide Water Quality Management Plans to Basin-wide Water Resources Management Plans. So integrating that water quality and quantity piece into our basin planning process. The statute also revised and clarified some language just to make the language a little bit more clear as to what is expected to be seen in a basin plan. It included a provision to include surface and groundwater resources to the extent known by the department, and we're doing that by working with various programs within the department as a whole. I did change our reporting requirements from annual to biannually, and then it defined our 17 major river basins using the USGS hydrologic catalog units. So regarding this report, we have 3 items that we are to recover in this report, and it is a joint report that is submitted on behalf of the department as well as the commission, and that is why we are bringing this report to you. We are to report on the progress in developing and implementing our basin plans. We're to report on the public engagement and involvement, or the public education piece. We're also to include a written statement on water quality and quantity conditions while we're preparing those basin plans. And then as part of statute 143-355P, we also report on the progress in developing our hydrologic models. So this year's report covers July 1st through 2020 to June 30th, 2022. And we have slides for each of these river basins that we have up here because those are the basins that we focused on during the last 2 years. So each of the following slides are going to be structured pretty much the same, and the report is structured this way too, because we wanted to really indicate that we covered those individual pieces as required by the statute. So we have information about plan development, some of the major pieces that we focused on, the public education or involvement piece, and then the water quality and quantity pieces. So for the Chuan River Basin, the EMC approved this 4th update in March of 2021. We really focused on the need for additional monitoring and data collection to identify pollution sources and algal blooms that are reoccurring in the Chuan and the Albemarle Sounds. Public involvement was through virtual meetings, phone, emails, because while we were putting this plan together, we were also in the middle of a pandemic. We identified those parameters of interest that were that had impairments throughout the basin, which are listed here. And then for the water use piece, we worked with our water supply planning branch and all the programs that are managed through them. And with that, it was determined that the current projected water use should be met through 2060. The Pasco River Basin was approved by the EMC in September 2021. It focused, like the Chuan, it focused on additional monitoring needs and data collection to identify pollution sources for algal blooms, specifically in the Perquimans and Little River and the Sound. Public involvement was through phone, virtual meetings, and emails. Nutrients continue to be an issue in this basin, as well as bacteria, dioxin, dissolved oxygen. And like the Pasco tank, the current and projected water use needs are expected to be met through 2060. But in this plan, we also included a statement that due to recreational areas, influxes of population, influxes of people visiting the area, that there could be a taxing of some of the water systems to meet the demands when tourist season is in place. The White Oak River Basin. This was the fourth document to be updated for the White Oak. It was approved in November of 2021. In this basin, we have a lot of shellfish growing areas, so we really focused on the shellfish growing areas and identifying strategies to reduce the impacts to those shellfish growing areas. We had public involvement and outreach through phone, virtual meetings, and emails. And instead of the saying story map is being created, we actually did create a story map for this basin, as well as the Chuan and Pasco tank. Or no, the White Oak does not have a story map. I back up. The Pasco tank has a story map. We are working on one for the White Oak in the future. Turbidity, fecal coliform, and enterococci bacteria are all identified as parameters of concern, as well as chlorophyll A and nutrients. And similar to the Pasco tank and the Chuan, current projected water use is expected to be met to 2060. But again, those the systems could be taxed due to visitors during summer months or high recreational months. In addition to working with our water supply planning branch for the water use information, we also worked with our I'm gonna mess up, CCP CUA program. And that is, all of you are familiar with that.
The Central Coastal Plain Capacity Use
I did it
Area.
yesterday too. I'm sorry. I should have written it down. I'm so sorry. I did it yesterday too. And Gabby will be upset with me. So, with the capacity use area. For the Yadkin was presented to the Water Quality Committee in May of 2022. That plan, you saw an extensive report by our basin planner, Virginia Baker, on that. She really focused on, a lot of that basin plan focused on nutrient issues across the basin, and with a particular interest in High Rock Lake and the Rocky River watershed. Restrictions started to be lifted. We're starting to be lifted towards the end of this basin planning process, so we were able to participate in a few more in-person meetings and association and river basin association meetings. Turbidity, fecal coliform, nutrients were all identified as parameters of interest. Current and projected water use is expected to be met. In this basin plan, we have a table, or included a table, that included the 4 IBT certificates that were issued for the basin. We are currently working on the Cape Fear River Basin Plan. We've been working on this plan for the past several months. This will be the 4th update to this document. As with the other basin plans, we'll be focusing on those chemical and physical and biological impairments and identifying ways to assess and improve those parameters and protect those parameters. We've been doing phone calls, emails, virtual meetings, but also stakeholder engagement opportunities. We have a unique opportunity to work with the Cape Fear River Assembly in this basin to really do a thorough outreach effort for this basin to identify concerns that are out there for the Cape Fear. Persistent water quality problems with nutrients, will include that in the basin plan. And then we're working with, again, all the DEQ agencies that deal with water use and water reporting to include a statement about that within the basin plan. Chemical, physical, and biological parameters are assessed regularly by DWR to determine how well water bodies are meeting their best intended use. Every 2 years, those assessments are submitted to EPA to fulfill reporting requirements for Section 303D and 305B of the Clean Water Act. Working with Cam McNutt, who you'll hear from a little bit later on in the agenda, we included a table in the report that did just a statewide total number of impairments by assessment units to include in the report. Oasis hydrologic models have been completed for 11 of our 17 river basins. There are joint models for the Yak and Lumber, which was the most recently approved or updated model. There's a combined model for the Watauga and the New, and the last combined model is the Cape Fear and the News. The Catawba is available through CHEOPS. In June of 2022, the department was able to secure funding for a server to house all the models, and the division is in the process of migrating the models to this new server. Once complete, they will be available to anyone who requests access. We continue, DEQ, the department continues to make progress on developing and implementing our basin plans, and this is not an effort that we do on our own. This is multi-people, multi-agencies, multi-sections working on these and with several stakeholders throughout the basin, and of course, our basin liaisons. So we thank you for your participation over the last 2 years as well. Over the next 2 years, we'll be continuing with the Cape Fear, trying to get that finalized and up to date. And then we will be focusing on the western bases. So the last 2 years, we've been on the eastern side of the state. The next 2 years, we'll finish the Cape Fear and move to the western side of the state. So our request today is to approve our 2020-2022 biennial report on the progress in developing and implementing basin-wide water resources management plans to be submitted to the ERC by November 1st. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Raquet? And just as a point of clarification for any new members, the Environmental Review Commission is a joint House-Senate legislative committee that typically meets in the interim between legislative sessions when there are interims. And often they receive reports like this. They may hold committee hearings on topics of particular interest, but we have a number of reporting requirements that go back to the legislature through the Environmental Review Commission. So any questions for Ms. Raquet? No questions. Is there a motion to approve the report? Commissioner Deerhake.
Thank you. The Water Quality Committee heard this yesterday and voted to recommend approval. It is coming to you the very next day. It's not a rulemaking action, so we can bring it to you in less than 30 days. So on behalf of the Water Quality Committee, I move approval.
Commissioner Deerhake moves approval. Is there a second? Commissioner Harris?
I second the motion.
Commissioner Harris seconds the motion. Is there any further discussion on the motion?
I have, Madam
Commissioner
Chair,
Kennedy?
just a question that came to mind while I was listening. The DEQ did announce some time ago the action strategy for Pfas. So is that coupled in with this Cape Fear piece as we move forward?
So what we were planning to do with that and what we've been directed to do as part of the Cape Fear Basin Plan is to acknowledge the PFAS, but then direct people directly to DEQ's emerging compounds web pages, because that's going to be where people are going to find the most up-to-date data, the most up-to-date action strategies or action plans that are in place. So we'll be making sure that there's a section in the plan about it, but it's not going to be detailed. It's going to point directly to the department's web pages.
Do you have a
Why
follow-up
would there
question?
be yes, follow up, please. Why would there be lack of detail in this particular report then?
Basin plans are all extensive and all encompassing, and the department has a strategy that they have in place that we would like to make sure that we are following their recommendations.
Mr. Rogers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Keen, The Basin Plans act as a base for us to work for all permitting purposes and gives us the baseline of the area within the river basin, details on water quality standard or water quality within the basin. The Pfas plan is what we're kind of laying above that. It's a different plan and strategy on how to manage the chemicals themselves and how to manage the industries that produce those chemicals. So they will coordinate, they do flush. We use the basin-wide plans for a baseline for our efforts. And so we integrate them to an extent. We give access to the PFAS plan through what Michelle was saying. And then they will be interrelated, but they are two separate activities and actions as it relates to the department.
And I guess to follow up on that, Commissioner Keene, the River Basin plans are planning documents, so they're very broadly based, as opposed to the specific water quality implementation plans that come through the rulemaking process. Commissioner Solomon?
Yeah, I would probably go with the director too. I think every basin is going to have problems with emerging compounds and emergingly regulated things. So we got to be careful we don't emphasize it too much in one and not in the other. But with that said, though, for Commissioner Keene, this is a joint report. So I think the EMC definitely has a heavier hand in this than if it was a department report. So I think the Water Quality Committee could come back and make some additions that the full EMC could take. I just think we need to be careful not to be too heavy in one place and not in another, because this will get us across the state in the course of all these plans being readopted or redeveloped, right?
And I would just note that because these are planning documents, they are intended to be fairly broad. Every basin has specific problems, which often require very detailed strategies to achieve water quality goals. And so in some areas, we have nutrient reduction strategies. In others, as in the Cape Fear, we have the specific problems with PFAS compounds. And the plans are providing an overview of the issues in each of these river basins and providing some basic data that the commission and the legislature can use to understand conditions across the state. But they have not, at least historically, have not been the vehicle for the very detailed water quality implementation strategies. Instead, they reference those, and it is very important to reference those because that does provide the additional detail. Are there any other questions or comments?
And if I might add, per statute, our basin plans are not rule. They are more guidance documents than rule. It's our opportunity to provide, like Chair Smith was saying, a plan or a guidance for local municipalities, for stakeholders to use to identify where they potentially protect water quality and their water resources in the basin.
So any other discussion on the motion? The motion is to approve the report as drafted and forward that report to the legislature's Environmental Review Commission. If there's no further discussion, all in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. Any opposed? There's no opposition. Thank you, Ms. Riquet. The next item on the agenda is to request approval of the Falls Lake Stage 1 existing development programs, and those include both one individual program and a joint compliance program. Mr. Heisman?
Good morning, Chairman Smith, Chairperson Smith, members of the commission. Apologize. My name is John Heisman. I work for the Division of Water Resources, the non-point source planning branch. I primarily work on the implementation of the Falls Lake nutrient management rules. And as was mentioned today, I'm before you to request approval of the Falls Lake Stage 1 existing development individual and joint compliance programs. I gave a full presentation at Water Quality Committee yesterday. In the interest of time, I'll hit more of the highlights today, and I'll be happy to, at the end, dive into any details if there's specific questions. Real quickly, I always like to start out just with a little bit of background, just to familiarize everybody who might be new to the Falls Lake watershed. This is a map of Falls Lake watershed. We're in the upper Neuse River Basin. It's a 770 square mile watershed made up of 6 counties and 8 municipalities that are listed here. So we're talking about the areas of Franklin, Person, Granville, Wake, Durham, Orange counties. The asterisks next to each of the local governments are the UNRBA, the Upper Neuse River Basin Association members. 13 of the 14 local governments are members of the UNRBA, with Roxborough being the lone non-member. And just to remind you all that the EMC adopted a nutrient management strategy comprised of a set of rules back in 2011 that addressed both point and non-point sources, calling for reductions in nitrogen and phosphorus loading to the lake in order to improve water quality and meet the chlorophyll A standard in the lake. So the strategy has been in place since 2011. And what I'm here today to talk about is the implementation of the stage 1 requirements for the existing development rule. And what the goal of that first stage is to offset the nutrient loading from lands that were developed between 2006 and 2012. And the significance there is 2006 is the baseline period for the Falls Lake Management Strategy. 2012 was when all the local governments adopted their local stormwater programs, so they were requiring new development to meet the nutrient requirements. Under the rule, DWR had to develop a model program that basically provided guidance to the local governments on how they could develop their local programs and implement the rule requirements. We did come before the EMC back in 2013 with a draft model program. At the time, we asked for that to be postponed in implementation so we could continue to collaborate and work with local governments, primarily to expand the toolbox of measures that they could use to implement the requirements under the rule. Some other things to highlight that have been going on since then, in addition to expanding that toolbox, you'll recall that in 2016 and 2018, there was legislation that modified the implementation schedule for stage 1. That's that legislation that called for the formation of the UNC Laboratory that was doing the Jordan Lake study and now the Falls Lake study that will be completed by 2023. Also, the Upper Neuse River Basin Association has been working on remodeling the lake, developing a new watershed, lake model, and statistical model. That will also be done in 2023. And that legislation called on the EMC to begin the rules readoption following the completion of that UNC study. So 2024, with an anticipated readoption by 2026, giving us time to collaborate with stakeholders in developing the rules. So stage 1 will be going on from now to roughly about 2026, 2027. I'll just hit the highlights here. We came back with a complete model program for approval to the EMC back in January 2021, and that program recognized 2 different compliance options for the rules, one being an individual compliance option and one being a joint. The joint was referenced as the UNRBA's proposal, what they refer to as the Interim Alternative Implementation Approach, IAIA for short, and it called on local governments to submit and begin implementing their programs by July of 2021. Again, there's 2 options. Option 1 is that individual approach where local governments on their own calculate their jurisdictional loads and how they're going to implement practices to reduce those loads. And the second option is that compliance where they collectively achieve reductions as a group. Just to point out that option 1, Roxborough was the lone local government that chose to do that option, develop their own local program. And then all 13 UNRBA local governments opted for option 2. I'll hit the key highlights of the 2 options real quickly here. Again, option 1, they calculate their stage 1 reduction needs. We refer to those as the jurisdictional loads. That's the load they need to offset from 2006 to 2012. Essentially, in their program, they do a measures opportunity assessment, looking at where they have opportunity to implement practices, and then lay out their plan about what they plan to implement, the prioritization of the practices and the timeline for that, and the reductions they anticipate to get from each of those practices. And of course, there's an annual reporting component. Option 2, that joint compliance approach, this was a voluntary option they can voluntarily opt into. And again, the real highlight here is it merges the reductions and the local governments meet those reductions collectively. The IAIA approach basically combines the wastewater over reductions in falls with the existing development reductions. And just to refresh your memory, there's three major wastewater discharges in falls: the Hillsborough treatment plant, the North Durham plant, and the South Granville Water and Sewer Authority, Sigwassa plant. And they're all doing a really great job of meeting their stage 1 reduction requirements. Those plants, they're in fact at about 53% reduction of nitrogen and 73% reduction of phosphorus. So when you combine that with the existing development reduction needs, they're all well below what they need to be reducing for stage 1. So what this IAI does is ensure that even though they're already meeting their stage 1 goals, it ensures that projects continue to be implemented that improve water quality in Falls Lake while this reexamination of the strategy continues, and it also expands the flexibility of the types of practices that they can implement to get reductions in water quality improvements. There, of course, is reporting components where there's individual reports and a combined report that's submitted, and there's some process things laid out about how things would work should a local government decide to leave the joint compliance approach and make sure they have a local program in place. In terms of what Roxborough submitted for their local program, they use the stormwater, the stormwater nitrogen and phosphorus accounting tool, the SNAP tool, to calculate their load reduction needs, and they're fairly modest. Roxborough is a small municipality, only about 8,000 people. They're hit pretty hard by the economic recession during that interim period, so they had very few development projects. So they're looking at a 15-pound reduction annually of nitrogen and 4 pounds of phosphorus. And they basically identified street sweeping as the primary practice that they would be implementing to achieve those reductions, and they would be funding that through their existing stormwater fees. And of course, they'll be reporting to us every year on their implementation, but it was a pretty straightforward local program. The Unrba Iei Program, again, I really want to highlight here that this program was developed through collaboration with both the Unrba, local governments, working closely with DWR, and NGOs like American Rivers all participate in the development of this. And we found it to fully address the requirements for the joint compliance approach in the model program. And really the guiding principles here are to summarize. It demonstrates a continued commitment to cost-effective management of the lake. It makes sure that projects are implemented during this re-examination process. And more importantly, it makes sure that we expand that list of available practices that local governments can implement to meet the requirements of the rules. And it just provides an overall simpler approach where basically we get away from pounds accounting and arguing over jurisdictional loads and get projects on the ground, and local governments commit to a fixed minimum amount of investment each year in projects and programs. The program document itself lays out those different individual investment commitments that I'll highlight in a second, lists out the eligible practices, and outlines the different reporting procedures and provides guidance to the local governments. This table is from the IAIA, and it lists out the individual investment levels for the 13 participants, and the UNRBA members all worked collectively in coming up with these commitments using their internal calculation methods on how they calculate their fees for their membership. And it's basically kind of weights things by their area within the watershed and their water use. And just to really impress upon the point, these are minimum commitments. The local governments can use them individually to do practices within their jurisdiction, or they can work together to combine funds to implement bigger projects. The money can count towards planning, land acquisition, design, construction of practices, and the maintenance. And if they spend more than their minimum in a year, it rolls over to the next year to count towards that. I won't read through this list, but in the IAI, it has a list of eligible activities. And again, this kind of spans the range of things from things like our SEM credit document, where we have pounds accounting in place for those BMPs, and includes other things that we know have a water quality and quantity benefit, but we don't necessarily have pounds accounting in place, things for like different green infrastructure projects, programmatic measures like fertilization ordinances, pet waste ordinances, other things like land conservation, and another one particular thing we approved recently was like hydrilla removal, like going out and removing invasive aquatic species in the rivers and streams. And of course, the local governments that are participating can propose additional practices, everything just kind of viewed through the lens of, does this practice have a water quality or quantity benefit for Falls Lake? In terms of administration, the UNRBA also formed a compliance group committee, which is basically just a subset of the local governments participating in this program. That's just a decision-making body that will kind of work as a liaison of submitting that joint report to DWR and also working with the individual local governments. There's some big members, some small members in the UNRBA, and they help to pool their resources. And if somebody wants to propose something new, the UNRBA compliance group will be that point of contact with DWR. There'll be, again, annual reports submitted both on a local level, individual reports every year, and then this compliance group committee will submit a summary report combining all that information. And the way it's laid out is the initial duration of this IAI was started implementation back when they submitted it in 2021 in July, go through 5 years to 2026, but there's provisions laid out in there that it can be extended should that rules readoption practice go beyond 2026 to make sure there's no lag in implementation. In terms of timeline, I'm here today asking for approval recommending approval of these different programs. Even though they're already implementing things, like this will formally approve their programs and they had to formally adopt them by December 2022. We want to reiterate that there's the re-examination process going on, that the UNRBA is leading up and engaging fully with DWR. And there's the UNC Laboratory study that will wrap up in 2023. And legislation calls for the EMC to begin that rules readoption process following those reports in 2023. And through that stakeholder process, working with all the regulated community, we anticipate having readoption and the end of stage 1 by 2026, 2027. So this is our requested action today. And before I get to that, I just want to again reiterate and thank all the local governments and the UNRBA and American Rivers and Peter Rao for their close collaboration and innovation on this IAI program. We do think that this is a positive influence in the water quality in Falls Lake, and we feel like it could prove to be a model for us to look at when we readopt the rules and perhaps in other watersheds that we look at management strategies there. So today I'm asking approval of the UNRBA's IAI Interim Alternative Implementation Approach and Roxborough's individual local program for implementing the Falls Lake Stage 1 existing development requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heisman. And I want to add my appreciation to all of the folks who have been involved in development of the IAIA, which is a very innovative approach, and it both assures that we'll continue to make progress during this stage where the regulatory program is being reviewed, and provide perhaps a model for doing things a little differently in the future in other watershed. So it's a very helpful experiment and really appreciative of the contributions of the local governments in this area to put that program together. So are there any questions for Mr. Heisman? Commissioner Solomon?
Probably not directly related to approval, but how is Falls Lake doing? At one time it was better than we thought it was in the beginning. Is it still doing okay?
It's seeing, I mean, it still has its problems. We're seeing areas of improvement. The map at the beginning there showed the latest assessment from 2022, the integrated report. And as you can see, we're still having, not meeting the standards. I'm kind of getting away from saying the impairment because I know there's debate about going on within the UNRBA and how they're looking at things in terms of not meeting standard versus whether a use is being impaired. But this is the area of the lake that's currently not meeting uses. You can see the blue arms that are, down at the lower where the Raleigh intake is, it's meeting standards. We see pieces of the lake fluctuate, come on, come off. Obviously, I think the reexamination is taking a hard look at the influences of, different wet years, the climatic impact on that. So there's still need for implementation. That's why
I'm not debating that. I'm just saying it's not a crisis for the EMC. This is not a crisis per se.
It's not. I mean, we're not seeing algal blooms and fish kills, but we are seeing exceedance of our chlorophyll standard.
Okay.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Heisman? No other questions. So the request again is to approve these two stage 1 existing development compliance programs, one the joint program and the other the City of Roxborough individual program. Is there a motion to approve the two programs as submitted? Commissioner Deerhage.
Thank you. Since this was in committee yesterday and the committee heard it and voted to approve recommending it to the full commission today, again, this is not a rulemaking action, so we can bring it to you the next day without a 30-day waiver. So on behalf of the Water Quality Committee, I move that the EMC approve the UNRBA's Interim Alternative Implementation Approach and City of Roxborough's individual local program for implementing the Falls Lake Stage 1 existing development requirements.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Commissioner Davis seconds. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the two implementation plans, please raise your hand. Any opposed by like sign? Approved unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Heisman.
Thank you, Chair Smith, members of the commission. Appreciate it.
The next action item on the agenda is supplemental review of local programs the Newsom Tar Pamlico new development, stormwater. And again, just a reminder, this was an item that came before the commission in July, and the commission deferred action. We are now looking at two sets of local programs that had gone separately through the Water Quality Committee in the first group in May, the second in July. And so they've been approved by the committee. The commission deferred action to get some additional information and also an opportunity to respond to some comments submitted by the Home Builders Association. So Mr. Darconti is back to present this item again, and this will be for commission action on 19 plans. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm Trish Darconti, Non-Point Source Planning Branch. I'm here to present the supplemental review of local programs we've done for Newsom Tar Pamlico and new development stormwater. Just some background on what's happened over the past few months is in May 2022, we brought the first 12 out of 23 of Cohort 1 local programs to the Water Quality Committee for approval, followed by another 7 to the Water Quality Committee in July. We advanced that first 12 up to the EMC. At that time, we received comments from the Home Builders Association regarding Statute 143-14.7, which is about stormwater, about what the requirements are, or that we can't require stormwater when you have existing BUA is not changing. You don't have a net increase in your BUA. So what the EMC requested that we do was review local programs in light of those comments and present the findings to you today. So the Home Builders Association stated that the 12 draft ordinances didn't comply with the requirements. And let me cover what that statute is about. In particular, A1 and B3 is what they were talking about. So A1 defines the concept of development. It says that it excludes existing built upon area from project density calculations, and that it bans requiring additional stormwater treatment for that existing development. It also redefines the concept of redevelopment, which is essentially it's a net increase in your BUA of 0 or less. Then the second part, B3, it reiterates A1 with greater specificity. It states that it applies regardless of the source of regulatory authority, and it calls for including those requirements in all local ordinances. So to cover where we've been with this, when we developed the model program, the rules require the model program to embody the elements in items 3 through 5 of the rules, which specifically are about local program implementation requirements, such as requiring stormwater plans for development, the illicit discharge program, public education, storm drain mapping, SDM maintenance, and enforcement. Item 4 is about what development is excluded, and this is where it specifically calls out redevelopment as defined in statute, and it uses the concept existing development, which is not defined in the statute, but was elaborated in 028 stormwater rules to specify that it's relative to the date of implementation of either the state or the local program that's involved. It also excludes agriculture and Falls Lake area. So Falls Lake areas have their own stormwater requirements, keeping in mind that several of the local governments that are in Falls Lake are also participating in the NUSE rules. Then item 5, the development project requirements. This is where it talks about how you calculate the project density, how you calculate the nutrient export from these sites. And there it very explicitly excludes or instructs you to exclude existing development from that calculation. I just covered those. So in our review, what we did is we looked at all 19 of the local ordinances and the program plans. We compared them to these ideas of development, redevelopment, existing development. We wanted to make sure that the time frame was properly identified and that they've properly excluded it from their stormwater requirements. So what we found was that 13 of them are just fine. Of this, I've listed them out. Some of them are from the first group that we brought in May, and then some more of them from the second group that we brought in July to Water Quality Committee. So we have 13 here that are, we think are completely acceptable, and we'd like to recommend their approval. And then we have another 6 that we recommend are returned to the local governments with requested revisions. And we've put, and the attachment there, it should be attachment B. And there's 6 of them, and I want to point out these are minor issues. They're very subtle, but we felt after looking at the statute that some clarification or refinement of their ordinance or their local program is in order. And so that spreadsheet, which is attachment B, specifies exactly what we would like them to change. And what they have is, and now the rules give us, give them 3 months to do their revision once we've asked for it. And then it gives DWR an additional 2 months to review what they've sent back to us. And then we would bring it back to the Water Quality Committee and the EMC. So this is our requested action. Division requests the EMC approve these 13 local programs for implementation of use in tar panel code new development stormwater, 13 that are listed up top. And then we also request that the EMC require revisions to these 6 local programs as described specifically in attachment B. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Darconti. I just wanted to add a couple of things. One is we really appreciated the opportunity to meet with Mr. Millis in the interim between meetings to talk about the original Home Builders Association concerns. And Commissioner Deerhake and I were able to meet with him as well as the DWR staff and come to agreement on this outcome. We were able to identify one source of confusion, which turned out to be a very recent legislative amendment to the statute that resolved the concerns about most of these ordinances, which turned out to be water supply watershed ordinance issues. And I believe all the commissioners received a copy of an email from Mr. Millis confirming that that conclusion. And so before taking other questions, I'll ask Commissioner Deerhake if she wants to add anything to this discussion, either from the committee meeting yesterday or from the earlier meetings.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the cooperation of everyone. I thank the Home Builders Association for the attention they've given us, and also in July to the EMC for the attention they provided and the opportunity for the staff to review from that perspective the comments that were raised in July. It turned out to be a very useful exercise. And I especially want to thank Chair Smith for her active role in working to ensure everyone is in agreement on the path that we're taking today. We heard it as an information item yesterday because this is an action item before the EMC. But I will say there were no concerns raised during that meeting about the presentation that we heard.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Darconti? Seeing none, is there a motion to, well, let me say this. I think it may be cleaner to address the 2 sets of programs separately. So first, is there a motion to approve the programs that the division has recommended for approval after this second review? Commissioner Davis?
Yes, Madam Chair, I recommend approval of the 13 local programs for implementation of the new tar panel code, new development stormwater.
Thank you. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Commissioner Deerhake seconds the motion. Any further discussion on the motion to approve the 13 plans recommended for approval? Commissioner Solomon?
Yeah, just a comment, and you and I have talked about this offline, but the concern I have, first of all, appreciation to the home builders for their detailed analysis, appreciation for Vice Chair Harris and Chair Deerhake for going through this the first time. Because I think we all talked about a detailed dive, and there's multiple programs coming here. These rules in the TARPAM are very unique to the 17 basins, so it takes a lot of effort and it takes a deep dive. So everybody did a good job, I think, there. We do have one outstanding issue though, because the Stormwater Association came forward and said, now that you approve these and tell us to go, we don't have a tool. And if members on the commissions remember back in the day, we talked about adopting the SNAP tool by name, and we said, no, just a department-led tool, or those jurisdictions can create their own tool. And I think the jeopardy we get into is we approve these and send them back now. We're all aware we are approving a tool that by rule, the department was supposed to have a model, a tool, and they don't. So I'm okay with that at a certain level. But it does seem like and we've agreed, Chair, that we would talk about that after this meeting and try to get that worked out. But I will go with the majority here, but I do have reservations that we're pacifying the home builders in some way or working through those details. We can't forget about the Stormwater Association either, because I think it's a legitimate concern of these communities. If they don't have a tool, how can they implement the plan? So I'll stop there, and I know you have an answer for that because we talked about it. But I just want to get it on the record and make sure the whole commission is aware of it. So, Madam Chair.
There were other issues raised in the letter from the Stormwater Association, and I believe I copied the commission members on my response to that email. Most of those issues are division level implementation issues, which do need to be followed up on. And so I've asked Mr. Rogers to do that, and also have committed to check in about a month to see where that stands and to find out whether there may be issues that the commission does need to address in the future. My understanding is that there is a SNAP tool in place. It is in the process of being reviewed and perhaps modified, but there is a tool in place, and that will remain in place until it is replaced by the modified SNAP tool. So is there any other discussion on the motion? Commissioner Deerhake.
And I spoke with the staff about the outreach that's involved with this tool, and they've assured me that they do intend to provide training to the local programs and any consultants that are contracted to those to understand about any revisions to the tool that comes out in the new version. So,
is there any other discussion on the motion, which is to approve the 13 plans recommended for approval? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Thank you. Any opposed? None opposed, so unanimous approval. And so as to the other 6 plans that the division has recommended returning to those local governments for some minor clarifications and corrections, is there a motion to accept the division's recommendation and defer approval of those plans until they've been revised per the division's request? Commissioner Duggan. Commissioner Duggan moves to defer approval of those plans pending corrections requested by the division. Is there a second to that motion? Commissioner Harris seconds the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Solomon?
I was just asked a point of order. I have not read the rule for this, but I thought if we turned it down or didn't approve it, they had a certain time to respond by rule. Do we need to make this motion, or do we just need to? Is this deferring, or are we sending them back? I guess that's my question. And I've got the rule in front of me. I could study it real quick, but.
Yes,
Yes.
Ms. Higgins.
Sure. Hi, Karen Higgins, Water Planning Section Chief. We need you all to vote to return them, and with the required revisions, then that will allow us to communicate to the local governments the
Okay.
revisions you all.
Okay, that's fine.
So
the vote's to return them for their action.
correct. The votes is to return them to the local government for the corrections requested by the division.
Very
Is that consistent with the original
It is.
motion? Thank you, Commissioner Duggan. And the original seconder, Commissioner Harris. So all in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Unanimously approved. Thank you, Mr. Arconti. So the next item on the agenda is approval of the 2024 303 delisting and delisting methodology. And that would be Mr. McNutt.
Good morning. I'm not Pam Bean, but I am working in her unit. She's out today, but she is online watching. I'm going to give you a brief presentation on the listing and delisting methodology that will apply for the 2024 assessment. Here are a few items I'll discuss briefly. This was in front of Water Quality Committee yesterday. The EMC is required to approve the 303D listing and delisting methodology. And that is the process where we determine whether water quality standards are being met in surface waters of North Carolina. 303D list is a list of water bodies in North Carolina and associated parameters, water quality parameters that require development of a total maximum daily load or some other management strategy to restore the water quality standards. Commonly called the 303D list, or you'll see later on, we also call it Category 5 assessments. Currently, the EPA has recently approved our 2022 list, and that was in April of this year. So we do have a currently approved list. The listing and delisting methodology lays out how water bodies are put onto the 303D list, and then also how they are taken off the 303D list, usually because of changes in water quality. I didn't mention this yesterday, but there are other reasons that things are taken off the list that are based on EPA guidance and approvals. Those are pretty rare, though. The EPA does have final approval over our 303D list. They do not approve the methodology, but they approve the resulting list of the water bodies and the parameters that are on that list. The integrated report is a larger list of all the assessments in North Carolina, which is 15,000 or so assessments. The 303D list is part of that, but the integrated report itself is not required to be approved by the EPA, but we submit that as well as our methodology, the 303D list, and changes that we make in each cycle to EPA. And we also put those out for public review as well. Here's a visual of the integrated report. The water bodies that are meeting criteria, this is put into the delisting component of the methodology, and then those category 4 and 5 are based on the listing component of it. And that is water bodies that are exceeding criteria for various parameters, dissolved oxygen, pH. A very common one is shellfish harvesting closures. That's half of our 303D list. Of the 15,000 or so assessments, about 1,200 of those are the 303D list, so roughly just under 10% of all the assessments that we do. The procedures themselves, the things that will be changing in the actual methodology are the years, the data window. We'll move that up from 2016 to 2020 to 2018 to 2022. So that's the range of data that we'll be looking at for the 2024 assessment. We'll also update the new data years, and those are data that we have not previously looked at. So 2021 and 2022 will be the new data years, and that is one of the considerations that's important in the listing and delisting methodology. The actual procedures themselves, this is a very brief on this, it's quite a bit longer in the actual methodologies. We assess numeric criteria on about 80 plus different parameters. We also do ecological integrity assessment using benthic and fish community data. We use fecal coliform bacteria and pterococci to assess recreation water quality standards. Marine fisheries, shellfish sanitation, growing area classifications are what's used to determine whether shellfish growing areas are meeting criteria. And then the combination of fish tissue data collected by DWR staff and fish consumption advisories and advice from HHS are used in the fish consumption assessment. When we were here in May reviewing the results of the 2022 process, we
showed you what comments that we received regarding the methodology. There are comments that we have received before. We did not make any changes on those, so we're basically approving the same listing and delisting methodology that we used in 2022. Here's our timeline. Hopefully we'll be able to make this as we did this last time in 2022, except on a little more of a relaxed schedule. It's important for us to have our methodology in place for third party and also for DWR staff to basically put the data together in summary format so that we can use it in the assessment process. So we need to have an assessment methodology in place. As we discussed yesterday, not having one in place really pinches everybody together and pushes a lot of workload and overlapping of listing cycles, which we want to avoid in the future, especially me. Here's our assessment website that you can get to on the presentation. And our action today is to recommend approval of the 2024 303D listing and delisting assessment methodology. Thanks, and I'll take questions.
Thank you. So, Mr. Deerheck, did you want to add anything?
Thank you. No, just as a refresher, some of you might remember we did hear one last summer and we're hearing it again. And even though it's biennial, and last summer was in a catch-up mode. So this is beginning on a normal timeline for the future biennial methodology updates. So we did hear this. We had a very limited discussion that I think everyone saw enough information that they were satisfied with what was before them. So I don't know whether you want to ask for questions, but I am prepared for a motion when you're ready.
I do want to ask commissioners, are there any questions for Mr. McNutt?
Yeah.
Mr. Solomon?
Two, and then they go to Cam, or could go to, I guess it won't go to Pam, maybe it'll go to Richard. A few years ago, we weren't publishing the integrated report. And I think 5 or 6 years ago, we had to make a motion to do that. Is it the intent for you guys to publish the integrated report? I think you've done that the last few years, but even though you're not required by EPA, will you still publish?
We publish it and it is mapped and all the stuff that, all the bells and whistles that go with it is out there.
Right, that's what I thought. I'm just confirming.
We just didn't review, we didn't publish it for public review. We started doing that 2018, 2016.
2016, I believe,
Right.
because I was part of that. Remember?
Right,
So,
yes.
but you will publish it for public review with.
We've continued to do that, yes.
Okay, and that's the intention. Okay, second question. Again, assessment units for lakes.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any change in that y'all intend to do, or is there any work going on to unify the way the assessment units are handled in lakes?
The thing that we put in place in 2018 is we did not have the technological capability to recombine assessment units. We now can do that, and we tried to do it on the lake in question, and we couldn't because of increased turbidity assessments in some of those lake arms. We were able to do it in we took 12 assessment units in 4 Charlotte streams and recombined them into 4 only. So we were able to reduce the number of assessment units. Now they're whole stream. Instead of broken up into 3 or 4 segments, it's a single top to bottom segment with all the assessments are the same on those. And we work with Charlotte to do that. So we do have the capability, and we just did it this last cycle.
And again, I think going back several years with us working through this, I think my concern, and for the commission's concern, is when they get extra sampling points in a run of the river, I don't have as much concern, because what they do is they'll take that and make it a different assessment unit. So in other words, you're halving the distance to make it a new assessment unit. That's maybe not so bad in a free-flowing river. But in a lake, if you get more information and you know it's a reach of the lake that's already impaired, now you're just stratifying, making shallow reaches of the lake, make it look like you got more and more impaired area. What you really got is an impaired area. And instead of dividing them, maybe you just need 5 or 6 assessment units in a lake. I'm oversimplifying, but that's kind of what it is. And I think you could composite the samples, and I know other people think that, and keep your assessment units constant, but composite them within the units instead of making more units, which I hear that's what you're trying to do, I guess.
If the assessments are the same in units that are back to back with each other, then they can be combined. That's what we did in Charlotte.
Okay, in a stream though. I'm worried about the lakes. Okay.
In the lakes, we use the same process, and estuaries, we also use the same process, okay, which would be similar.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Kane?
On the, again, going back to the action strategy for Pfas. So if we have that department, that lane, so getting it on the list or off the list, is there any information that comes from that particular strategy point that would give you information to bring off or put on a list?
For PFAS specifically,
For what that is to couple with that, group, with that strategy group, to get that information to put on, whether it determines a list, off the list or on the list. Working with that action strategy for PFAS that was put back together in July.
as far as listing goes, we would need to have a water quality standard approved for that. And then you would need to come back here and approve this methodology again that would include that. And if it fell under the numeric criteria with 10% exceedance, 90%, then that's pretty simple. And that's what I foresee a lot of new standards falling under that. But if it was something else, then it would probably require some larger group to decide what a specific assessment method that we don't currently have.
But the department would, if I could follow up, would the department work together with the strategy that is PFAS?
I would assume that would be part of it, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is my understanding, that the measures or the approaches to addressing the PFAS contamination are proceeding on a number of different levels. And so I think we hope to get to the point where you want to be, which is that we can actually assess in-stream conditions. Any other questions for Mr. McNutt? If not, Commissioner Deerhake?
Thank you. Since this comes from committee, we did hear this yesterday and voted to approve recommending to the full commission for approval. Again, this is not a rulemaking action, so we're bringing it the next day. We, on behalf of the Water Quality Committee, I recommend approval of the 2024 303D listing and delisting assessment methodology.
Is there a second to the motion? Commissioner Harris seconds the motion. Any further discussion on the motion? Commissioner McAdams?
Just a point of semantics. We're not voting, I believe, to recommend approval. We're voting to approve. Is that right?
Yes, my motion was from the committee to recommend approval. So,
and
yes.
Therefore, with
So
that recommendation, we now move approval.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
That's correct.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
the
you.
motion is to approve
Thank you.
And
the
what was
listing
in the
methodology.
PowerPoint also provided a little bit of confusion in my own mind.
Oh, very good point. Yeah.
All right.
So, so the motion is to approve the listing and delisting assessment methodology. Is there any further discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor, please raise your hands. Any opposed by like sign? No opposition. So the motion unanimously carries. Thank you, Mr. McNutt. And the final action item before we go into closed session is to request approval of a 30-day waiver and proceed to public notice and hearing with revisions to the lab certification rule. So this will be Mr. Crawford, Commissioner Carter.
Just a question, is there a particular reason why we're got a 30-day waiver here?
Yes, there is a particular reason. So the proposed rule change is to add 2 compounds to the rule that lists the compounds for which DWR will certify labs to test. And the recommendation is related specifically to PFAS compounds. And the rule change is necessary. We need to add these particular compounds to this list in the rule in order to make it possible for us to certify labs to do the analysis of those samples. And so this is something that's very time sensitive, and it only affects lab certification. So
Okay.
it's just this administrative process of approving the labs to do the analytical work.
Well, that's fine. It sounds certainly justified in this case, but generally, of course, we don't favor 30-day waivers. That's the reason for my question.
Yes, generally we don't. So where was I? Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Chair Smith, and all other members of the commission for your time today. Yes, I'm Todd Crawford. I manage the wastewater groundwater laboratory certification branch, and we're here to request addition of PFAS and organic fluorine parameters to the scope of our rules, which is 804D. That is the rule that lists the organic parameters that are available for certification. The rule states each organic parameter listed in the paragraph shall be considered a certifiable parameter. One or more parameter methods shall be listed with a laboratory certified parameters. So there are methods that would be certified underneath these broader parameters. Currently, the sources of the methods that would be under those parameters are in 805A1, which is basically 40 CFR, standard methods, SW 846, those sources that approve methods that are certified by our branch. Currently, the allowable organic parameters in 804D is this particular list here, which will appear again later with the added parameters that we're requesting. Start with PFAS. Obviously, we all know that's a great concern for regulators and the general public at large. DEQ anticipates requiring permitted facilities to test for this class of compounds in the near future. Some are already doing that. The permits require that the analyses be performed by a certified laboratory, meaning they have to be certified by our branch. EPA method 1633 is the method for PFAS, which is currently in draft form, and we expect that to be approved and promulgated within the year. PFAS is not a parameter on our list currently, so that would need to be added to 804B. Organic fluorine provides an aggregate measurement of chemical substances that contain the carbon-fluorine bond, which is a main aspect of the PFAS compounds. So this analysis is especially useful for understanding the presence and forms of PFAS in wastewater, and can be used in conjunction with the PFAS method. It is also not currently a parameter on our scope, so it would need to be added to 804D. Here's what 804D would look like with the two added parameters in red. In conclusion, PFAS, as I said before, is of great concern for the department and the public at large. The organic fluorine analysis is a useful screening tool and complementary parameter to the PFAS method. There is a draft organic fluorine method. We expect that to also be approved and promulgated by EPA within the year. We are currently unable to certify for either of those two methods because the parameters are not within the scope of our rules. So they would need to be added to the 804D portion of our rules. So we are requesting the EMC approved to proceed to public notice and hearing with the proposed revisions to Rule 0804 to include parameters PFAS and organic fluorine and associated regulatory impact analysis, which has been already approved this past Friday.
Are there any questions for Mr. Crawford? Commissioner Solomon?
Yeah, I want to clarify, I think you caught yourself. I didn't catch it in my read of these slides, but when I saw it there, PFAS has an EPA standard that's pending, a draft standard. I think it's in your slides. I think you said it, but your organic fluorine, you didn't say had an EPA, you didn't show it in your slides, but you said it. So it has one too. So both of these have draft EPA methods for them. Okay, okay.
Any other questions? Commissioner Lazorick?
Thank you. And this isn't part of the action, but are the methods that are likely to be approved, are they just presence or absence, or are they quantification for all of this?
They are quantification.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. King?
Would it be proper to ask, I guess, a cost analysis? I know we're doing these little analysis, but I just have a question on cost analysis on laboratories.
It's an appropriate question with respect to the regulatory impact analysis on this particular rule change. And again, what this rule change would do is simply add 2 additional compounds to the list of compounds for which DWR certifies labs.
Okay, so the certified labs, how many do we have now that are in compliance?
Well, when you say in compliance,
Well, so none of them are in compliance until we get these other 2 boxes checked off, I guess.
right, any data that's being submitted to the department right now would be considered uncertified data. So adding these 2 parameters will allow that data to be considered certified regulatory data once they've added the approved methods to the scope of their, to each laboratory's scope that chooses to get the methods.
So a follow-up then is we had a scope prior to this to get where we are today to know what we know. Is that correct? With the labs?
Yes.
Okay.
Right now, that rule that we're proposing to amend lists out all the parameters that are available for certification.
So we had a cost. We knew what it would cost to get the labs to do this.
Yes, I detailed that in the regulatory impact.
Gotcha.
analysis.
Yes, I remember that. Now, if we go and add this, what would be the additional cost with the labs? Once they added this, I'm sure there'll be an expense to them to have to get into doing this extra, checking off this extra box or 2 boxes. So do you have some sort of analysis of a cost of adding this?
Yes.
So what is that?
So basically, the cost to add a parameter method, which is what they would be doing, is $85 per method.
Okay.
So it would be $85 for them to add one or the other, or 170 if they decided they wanted both.
Okay.
Of course, there would be other investments for that laboratory if they did not have the specialized equipment to
Right.
perform the method.
That's what we're getting back to is how many labs are there that's already qualified to give the information that we have today? If we put this in force, then how many labs will be financially able to carry on and do what they're going to do? So if they're a private laboratory or they're a federal or state funded laboratory in any way, then will we have enough laboratories to be competitive with prices to keep the prices from driving up because you're adding these boxes to be checked, if that makes any sense? I'm just trying to get a cost.
I can kind of give you a synopsis of, an abbreviated version of what we did and the approach we took. So we looked at all of the labs currently certified. Then we looked at how many of those labs are currently performing organic analyses versus inorganic analyses. We felt like the labs that were not doing any organic analyses at all would not pursue PFAS or organic fluorine simply because the differences between organic analysis and inorganic analysis, they wouldn't be set up for any of that. So we kind of narrowed the list there. So then we polled all of the laboratories that are currently doing organic analyses. There were 42, I believe. All of those were commercial laboratories except one, which was Cherry Point, and all they're looking at is 1,4-dioxane. So we polled all those 42. We got approximately 36 responses, and the poll was, when these methods were approved, were they planning to seek certification for them? Out of those 36 responses, I believe we had 13, or actually it would be, I think 11 that said they would definitely pursue the PFAS, and of those 11, 2 of them also said they would pursue the organic fluorine. So you're looking most likely around 13 commercial laboratories that would seek the certification. We've also had, I had a call from a lab in California who is not certified at all in North Carolina, asking if we were going to certify and when. So there's the possibility of other out-of-state commercial laboratories that would seek certification in North Carolina to get a bite of that business.
Thank you so much. That was a good answer. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and it points to, I guess, another just clarification, which is no labs are required to do this type of analysis. It's entirely up to the lab, the commercial labs, to decide whether to offer this or not. So the rule change simply allows DWR to certify those labs, so the data they are producing is certified and can be used in water quality permitting. Any other questions for Mr. Crawford?
And just to add on to that, several of the labs, like GEL and some of the ones that are doing work now, are already certified with us, just not for this because we can't offer it yet. So those labs would be that we're already getting data from would then be able to call it certified regulatory data.
So are there any other questions? If not, we have two actions we need to take. The first is the commission needs to agree to waive the 30-day rule. It's actually a bylaw to waive our own rule, which normally requires 30 days between the committee action and commission action. So is there a motion to waive the 30-day period? Commissioner Deerhake?
Thank you. We did consider this yesterday in committee and did want to recommend waiving it. So on behalf of Water Quality Committee, I move that we waive EMC bylaw Article 7, Section 2.
Bless you for knowing what the section is.
I looked it up.
We all do.
Is there a second to the motion?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner McAdams?
I second the motion.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed by like sign? There are no votes in opposition, so the motion carries unanimously. And now the actual action item, which is to approve the draft rule changes to go to public notice with the regulatory impact analysis. Commissioner Deerhake.
Since this comes out of the Water Quality Committee, on behalf of the Water Quality Committee, I move that the EMC approve to proceed to public notice and hearing with the proposed revisions to Rule 15A NCAC 02H.0804 to include parameters PFAS, PFAS, and organic fluorine and associated regulatory impact analysis.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Commissioner Davis seconds the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Any opposed? No votes opposed, so the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Chair Smith and committee members. I appreciate your time.
The next item on the agenda requires the commission to go into closed session, and I'm going to defer to Mr. Reynolds in a moment to explain the ground rules for that. All I wanted to say in advance is that my intent is for us to take a 10-minute break. So a break for the commission members and any staff who can stay for the closed session. Mr. Reynolds can address who can stay and who can go. And 10 minutes to also clear the room of those of you who cannot stay in the room during the closed session. We will come back after closed session. No action will be taken in that session. It's just for discussion purposes. So we will come back into open session at some point after the closed session to complete our agenda, including any business related to the closed session. So, Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The item coming before the commission now relates to the objections to by the RRC to EMC rules O2B. There's several of those rules, but specifically related to 1,4-dioxane and O2H related to wetlands. At the commission's direction, at the July meeting, I submitted information to the RRC about that. The additional information was summarily rejected, and no consideration was given to the merits of the information. And so I would recommend that the commission go into closed session to consult with me regarding potential actions or next steps related to those objections. And in terms of who all can stay, if you have a vote on the commission besides myself, you're invited to stay and encouraged to stay. If you do not have a vote, you're invited to excuse yourself.
So let's plan to,
I'm not sure, Madam Chair, if you want that motion first.
oh, I'm sorry.
Can
That's
I-
right. We do need a motion to go into closed session.
Can I go to council, question for council, just for clarification?
Sure.
And I think I know where we're going, but we've had a very public process of taking this through the EMC, and all the RRC documents are public domain. And we have a rule with two options to go by. I'm just questioning for the role of public transparency, what part of this needs to go to session and what part of this can stay in open forum? Because I think there is a public interest, a regulated community interest in knowing the particulars of this at some level.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I may respond to that, the open meetings law specifically recognizes attorney-client privilege with respect to potential legal actions and how to respond to these things. As the chair has already indicated, she does not intend to entertain motions during the closed session, only to discuss with council items which I would consider to be subject to privilege, and then whatever discussion that the commission wants to take or action that it may want to take after that would certainly be an open session.
Okay, and you'll advise us what should stay attorney-client privilege. I think we know, but I just clarify, because there probably needs to be some public statement or the discussions after closed session.
I take no issue with that, Madam Chair, just understanding my obligation as your counsel. I am required to maintain privilege, and there are items that I do think would certainly fall within that category as part of this discussion.
Fair.
So is there a motion to go into closed session for purposes of discussing the Rules Review Commission objections and council's recommendations with respect to those objections? Commissioner Deerhake.
Thank you. Since this is water quality related, I'm prepared to make a motion. Pursuant to NC General Statute Section 143-318.11A3, I move to enter into closed session to consult with council regarding the Rules Review Commission's objections to EMC rules pertaining to 1,4-dioxane and wetlands, including the potential to pursue judicial review of the objections.
Is there a second to the motion? Commissioner Arado seconds the motion. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Any opposed? No opposition. The motion carries unanimously. And let's plan on having the commission members, the room cleared and commission members back here at 11 o'clock.
All right.
We discussed both the O2B rules and those specifically related to 1,4-dioxane that were objected to in May, as well as the O2H rules related to wetlands that were also objected to in May. I recommended to the commission that it authorize me to seek the return of the rules, of the O2B rules for 1,4-dioxane, and then pursue judicial review of that objection and to maintain status quo with the wetlands rules. So, Madam Chair, with that.
So the council's recommendation with respect to the 2B rule and specifically the 1,4-dioxane standard was to request the Rules Review Commission to return the rule to the agency, which would then put the Environmental Management Commission in the position of being able to seek judicial review of the Rules Review Commission objection. And so we are, having discussed that in closed session, we are ready for any commission member to make a motion on that particular recommendation. Yeah, Commissioner Deerhake.
Thank you. I move to authorize council to seek the return of rules O2B.0208, .0212, .0214, .0216, and .0218, and to undertake all actions necessary to pursue judicial review of the RRC's objection to those rules.
Is there a second to the motion? Commissioner Arata seconds the motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Solomon?
I think I'll vote against the motion just because I think we have an obligation to try first. And should we fail to revise the rules, I think there are some other remedies we can do, but I think we're obligated to try first. So for that reason, I'll vote against this.
Is there any other discussion on the motion? Commissioner Carter?
Well, I'm fundamentally, basically agree with.
Excuse me just a moment. Would you use your microphone? Thank you.
I'm basically in agreement with Commissioner Solomon. I think, as I suggested, we are making direct contact with that, with the Rules Review Commission to try to seek a resolution before proceeding to litigation. So on that basis, I'm going to vote against this motion too.
Commissioner Deerhake?
Chair, I realize I omitted one section that in the motion it should also include .0215.
Thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Arata, are you satisfied with the correction to the original motion?
Yes.
So Commissioner Arata's seconder has accepted that modification of the motion. Commissioner Bailey?
It was my understanding that when a lawsuit like that is filed, that it will be required, I think, to go into dispute resolution. Is that correct? Or is it just an option?
Generally speaking, actions in Superior Court are directed toward dispute resolution or mediation as well. And I assume that I understood the motion to include the authorization to pursue that in addition to judicial review as part of it, and would bring that issue back to the commission if the authorization is granted to pursue it.
Did that respond to your question?
Yes, yes, I just wanted to make sure that was part of the process once it gets, if it were to get filed.
So that's correct.
Resolution would be
If
a
there were
part.
to be a filing for judicial review, then mediation is a normal part of the process before going forward to any hearing. Is any other discussion or comment on the motion? Commissioner Lazare?
Yeah, I'm just fundamentally concerned about a previously approved fiscal note, approved by OSBM, that being the basis the RRC would object. I feel like it really needs to be settled officially that that's not an appropriate reason, for them to object to a rule. So for that reason, I'm going to support the motion.
Any other discussion on the motion? Commissioner Keene?
Thank you, Madam Chair. During the discussion in closed session, it was apparent to me that it seems a breakdown in communication from the onset of this process with the RC and with representation of EMC. That's my that's my thought going forward. I cannot vote for the motion for I think and I believe that further negotiation can be made without using all means necessary, particularly judicial action. Even though I understand it brings people more to the table, but certainly there may be some misinterpretation on maybe the RC. And if so, then maybe it can be settled prior to through some type of negotiable stance and a relationship that I think we have in the past. That was something that was also brought out, that we have good record in the last 4 to 6 years, and I'd like to keep that clean. I'm not saying that this is unclean, but certainly my thoughts are moving forward and making sure that both parties basically have clean hands. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is there any other discussion on the motion? Seeing no other discussion, all in favor of the motion, which is to authorize council to request a return of the rule and to pursue judicial review of the Rules Review Commission objections, please raise your hand. Any opposed? The ayes have it, so the motion carries. We'll go to the second item, which was council's recommendation with respect to the Rules Review Commission objection to the wetlands rules. And council's recommendation in that case was to take no action, to maintain the status quo, which leaves the permanent rule under review by the Rules Review Commission and leaves the temporary rule in effect in the meantime. Is there a motion with respect to that recommendation? Mr. Carter?
I move to approve council's recommendation.
Is there a second to the motion? Commissioner Keene?
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Keene seconds the motion. Is there any discussion on that motion? Commissioner Solomon?
Again, I'll say I think we have an obligation to try. I do believe that by keeping things under a temporary rule, it will draw attention of another number of parties that seek certainty. So I think our first course should be to try and then to fall back and let the temporary rule stand. But I understand we're probably going in a different direction. So thank you.
Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. And we'll make sure that count is done. All opposed? Thank you very much. The motion carries. And I think that disposes of that piece of business, and we move on to the remaining agenda items, which are division director comments. Mr. Abrazinskis, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. 2 quick updates today. First, related to changes to the Vehicle Emissions Inspection Program, or I&M program. This is in response to session law in 2020, passed by the General Assembly to remove 3 counties from the emissions inspection program: Lee, Onslow, and Rockingham counties. The staff at DAQ submitted a state implementation plan amendment to EPA in late 2020, and EPA approved that here in the summer of 2022. Following that approval by EPA, we certified to the revisor of statutes that had become official, and DMV will be officially removing those counties from the program on November 1st of this year. Final update today is just an ozone season update. The data is looking really good. We've had a quiet season thus far. If the ozone season were to end today, our design values would drop to 64 parts per billion. That's relative to a 70 part per billion standard. So we're in good shape, have an adequate margin of safety, and hope that trend continues. So that's all I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rogers.
There we go. Thank you, Madam Chair, Commission. You have my written comments that you're welcome to review. I do want to note under emerging compounds update that EPA is proposing to designate two of the most widely used PFAS, PFOA, and PFAS as hazardous substances under the CERCLA, and it is known as Superfund. This is going to increase transparency of these release of these harmful chemicals and help hold polluters accountable for cleaning up their contamination, which is what we're striving for as well in North Carolina. I do want to appreciate the comments, interest, and discussion today about emerging compounds, specifically Commissioner Keene and his interest. We'll let you know that we're expanding our efforts statewide. We have been focused, rightly so, on the Cape Fear River Basin for quite some time. But you'll see in my report that we're looking to expand our testing in public water supplies outside the Cape Fear Basin area, as well as some groundwater sampling that we're doing. And we're continuing to make progress related to our permitted facilities, the MPDS, in our surface waters. I think that is it. Thank you.
I ask you to address one other thing. Richard, since yesterday in the Water Quality Committee, you provided just a brief status report on White Oak Farms and the newspaper coverage of the spill there and the situation generally. If you could just give the full commission the 5-cent version.
Indeed. Am I on? Yeah. White Oak Farms, as y'all are well aware, if you've read the articles or seen any media on this, is a facility is a AFO digester facility that has been in violation. On Memorial Day, staff was called out, called with a complaint where they observed foam coming out of the digester and overflowing the sides of the lagoon, and eventually it reached surface waters. It's been described more as meringue type foam. It's not just liquid. The foam is mainly composed of grease, fats, and oils and gases from the lagoon system. White Oak Farms is not in compliant with their permit. They were using outside waste as a source, which they were permitted to do. However, there's a great imbalance with the hog waste that was supposed to be participating in the digesting of the waste and outside waste, which caused the incident. The staff had been out in February on a compliance visit, had noticed some of this issue. The owner said there's a breach in the canopy covering of the lagoon, and that's what caused that. There was no identification or knowledge of its reaching surface water at that time. They were issued an NOV. Obviously, they've been issued an NOV for this most recent event. We are still in the process of looking at the penalty that will be ensue as a result of this. When we look at the discharge into surface waters, the estimation is around 30,000 gallons of liquid that reached a swamp nearby. And so we are taking that into account as well. And so I believe that is all. I think one detail, we have our general permits that have gone out for the AFO digesters just recently. They were legislated and we got them out. This farm, as I mentioned, was on an individual permit. There are only 3 farms that we have that are under this type of permit, which co-mingles waste. The other 2 have not had any problems or violations of note, and we have been checking. And so we'll provide any other updates, and I'll be glad to answer any questions commissioners may have.
Any questions about that? One interesting issue the situation raises is how exactly we're permitting the types of waste that are going into these facilities, because it certainly seems that the problem here was likely created by the recipe, so to speak. So that may be something that's worth talking about a little bit more in the future in terms of permit standards and how exactly we regulate what goes into those facilities. It hasn't, that I'm aware of, been really an issue previously. We generally assume correctly that swan waste management systems have swan waste in them, but it turns out this particular system had many other things being fed into it. So that may just be an issue that bears keeping an eye on and talking about if there's a need, if the division flags a need for some additional guidance on that. Commissioner Carter?
I'm curious, what other kind of waste were they taking beyond swine waste?
It was Smithfield Foods has a processing taking Smithfield processing plant as well.
Okay.
So they grind down, incorporate what happened. This alternative and this was all with the
Commissioner Solomon?
Yeah, and then I'll add my experience. Donna's got some too, but not many utilities make money handling fat, oil, and grease. I know this sounds like industrial, but a lot of places won't take it. So those guys in those local jurisdictions are just finding a way to dump it. And that's probably what they're doing. And so you're caught. And a little bit of a catch-22, if you ban them from doing something like that, they may find another place to dump it wildly or have to, go out of business. So it's not an easy solution, I don't think, as you look at what to do.
So, I think the one issue is we permit these particular types of facilities as swan waste management facilities and not general landfills or waste disposal sites. So that's an important thing to keep in mind because the standards are very different for one versus the other. Well, thank you, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Scott?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. A couple of rulemaking updates. We have two rule sets that had been pending legislative review. Per session law requirements became effective on August 23rd. That was the 02N UST rules and the 0832 septic management rules became effective on August the 23rd. We are very excited that our brownfields program within DEQ and the Division of Waste Management has received an additional grant of $6 million through the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, in addition to a $2 million grant we just got for additional brownfields assessment work across the state. So these two grants are going to definitely make North Carolina a leader in local outreach to disadvantaged communities and further our national leadership on both vapor intrusion, technical issues, and stewardship of institutional controls for brownfield sites. So we're really excited about that. As the commission has touched on today, a lot of work going on with emerging compounds and PFAS, a lot of private well sampling in the lower Cape Fear region. Just a brief update as it relates to the Commerce facility. There's been approximately 811 private wells that have been sampled in that area where laboratory results have been received back by Comores and submitted to DEQ. There's about 181 private well owners in that region that are now eligible under the consent order for some type of alternate water. This private well sampling will continue on for quite some time, as private well sampling also continues around the Bladen County plant, where almost 9,000 private wells have been sampled thus far. On the final note, our implementation of the consent order with the Colonial Pipeline and the release that occurred in Huntersville, North Carolina, continues. The significant update there is that Colonial was required under the consent order to submit an updated estimated release volume, which the department received back on July 22nd. That new estimate of that gasoline release is at 2 million gallons. The good part is Colonial has currently recovered 1.5 million of that from groundwater. So that free product recovery continues, and our work on that site continues. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wren?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. One quick item this afternoon. Our dam safety program has been recognized with a 2022 Dam Safety Award for the Southeast region from the Association of State Dam Safety Officials. This award will be given to us in September at a conference in Baltimore. And specifically, the ASDO noted division's work on the following initiatives. And first one is the Overtopping Studies. The division that's evaluated 525 dams in 3 different river basins to look at the potential for overtopping during a variety of severe weather events. We've developed a semi-quantitative risk analysis and risk-informed inspection tool with the help of Freeze Nichols to be able to determine the probability of dam failure. This tool uses Survey 123, which is easily integrated into ArcGIS and other mapping tools. And as part of that, we have also developed a facility assessment management application. And this is a web app that, again, integrates ArcGIS technology and allows us to develop a variety of mitigation and response activities through hazard classifications and rainfall events that could happen in these areas, and helps us respond to those areas with proper inspections and response measures. So we're really excited about the award, and it is, as I said, going to be given to us this month at a conference in Baltimore. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for any of the division directors? If not, we'll go to the committee chairs. Commissioner Arata?
The Air Quality Committee met briefly yesterday. We had one item that will be coming forward to the full commission. It's a rule that enables electronic submission of certain documents. And that should be coming to the commission in November, I believe. That's it.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Bailey?
There was no meeting this month.
Commissioner Deerhake's committee always meets. Through no fault of her own, I might add.
Thank you. Water quality did meet, and everything that was on your agenda today from water quality was also addressed yesterday, with the one addition of a beginning of a high quality waters reclassification and outstanding waters reclassifications. And that's for a total of 11 waters that are in the Watauga River Basin. These are in Avery and Watauga counties, and they were identified, I guess you might even say nominated, based on work done in the biological assessments branch. Is that the correct name for them? The people who do the field examinations, data collection. None of these waters are scheduled for any development projects or DOT projects, the staff confirmed, and it has strong support from the local stakeholders. So this will be something that you see in November as a proposal to go to public notice. So we were all encouraged to hear about these new opportunities for reclassifying these special waters. I will also say, and I've just taken the personal point here to distribute a little memo that I wrote on a trip that I took to the three basins that I liaison to, and my thanks to Fred Tarver for arranging meetings with interested people in those basins. It's so far west that I had to make a specific trip for it, and considered it very helpful, as always, to get to visit with people in the local area. And I hope you will take a few minutes to read that and see what's on their minds in that part of the state.
Commissioner McAdams?
The Water Allocation Committee also did not meet yesterday, so no report.
So other commission members, Commissioner Anderson? Thank you. We did have a little confusion on the agenda about the remissions committee schedule. So group 2 is not actually meeting today. And to express a little bit of disappointment in Commissioner Andrews, who was promising me this morning he was going to raise Cain about something during the meeting today, and I'm still waiting for that moment to come. Commissioner Arata, did you have anything else? Commissioner Bailey? Commissioner Carter?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I want to briefly mention, as we heard yesterday at the Air Quality Committee, we're expecting the fiscal note on the Reggie rulemaking petition in November. I think we're going to need to take a hard look at that and what, if anything, we need to do with that Reggie rulemaking. As you and I discussed last week, I am very strongly of the view that this commission needs to request a formal legal opinion from the Attorney General on our legal authority related to creation of a Reggie program in this state. Now, the commission chose not to do that last year before we acted on the petition, but we've had a significant or very significant supervening event, which was the adoption of HB 951. And HB 951 does one very specific thing. It takes the objective set out in the governor's clean power plan for the state. That is a 70% reduction in CO2 from the electric power sector. And it assigns that project to the Utilities Commission, not to us, but to the Utilities Commission. So now the DEQ does have a supporting role with the Utilities Commission in that, but the primary jurisdiction and role is strictly over there, which is where it belongs, in my opinion. They're the energy specialists in this state. We are certainly not. And that's one of the reasons I'm very concerned about doing anything to go forward on this Reggie petition. But bottom line is, I think we do need to, and I will not offer that motion today, but I probably will in November, that we need to request that formal legal opinion from the Attorney General on what legal authority, if any, and I think it's very tenuous at best before 951, and once with 951 went in place, I think that superseded any realistic legal authority we might have to act on that or to put a Reggie program in place. And so I think we need to put that request forward at our November meeting.
So thank you for those comments. And we did have a good conversation last week. And I'll just say for now that my initial thought about the authority issue is that there are a number of questions that arise out of the Reggie rule and the combination of the Reggie rule with House Bill 951, but that we could better formulate clear questions after we send the rules out to notice and get comments back. So one thing to think about is an important issue in asking for any sort of formal legal opinion is to get the question right. It's important to get it as specific as it needs to be and to avoid broad questions that may have implications beyond those that the commission wants to address. And so my initial feeling is that we will probably be in a better position to do that once the rules are ready, assuming we get a certified fiscal note, which is another step in between. But assuming we get a certified fiscal note, when these rules go out to public notice and we get comments back that can better focus what some of those questions are. And by that time, we also should have seen the final carbon reduction plan coming out of the Utilities Commission. Their deadline is the end of this calendar year, which will also give us a better picture of how these two things fit together. So I don't think there is, I certainly wouldn't disagree that there are reasonable questions to ask. I think it's a question of when best to ask those questions and have the right information to formulate the questions that we need to have answered. So I appreciate Commissioner Carter's input on that, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it in the future. Commissioner Davis. Commissioner Deerhake.
I intended to congratulate Demler on their dam safety award. That's great work. Thank you. It's a very important function. And I thank the staff as always for all of their support.
Commissioner Duggan. Commissioner Harris. Commissioner Keene. Commissioner Kelvington.
No comment.
Commissioner Lazorick. Commissioner McAdams.
No comment.
And Commissioner Solomon.
Just recognize Linwood Peel. Most of you probably know I'm facilitating the 2-year PD River Basin Plan in South Carolina with stakeholders, but Director Rogers sent Linwood Peel down to South Carolina and some very good cross-pollination between the states with his presentation and communication, and that will continue to go back and forth. I'm going to say thank you to the department.
Thank you. Councilor Reynolds, do you have any other comments?
I believe I've said enough. Thank you.
And second time today that Commissioner Carter and legal counsel have agreed with each other. Well, thank you for your attendance and all the staff support, and this meeting is adjourned.